Good morning and welcome back to Search the Scriptures. Again, I'm Scott McCown. I'm the minister with the Church of Christ in Parrish, Alabama. Love for you to come and join us, to be with us as we worship, as we assemble together. Our next assembly time will be Sunday morning at 9 o'clock for Bible study, 10 o'clock for worship, and then Sunday evening at 5 o'clock. Of course, we meet on Wednesday evenings at 7 o'clock during the spring and summer months. And we would love for you to come and be a part of our assemblies and a part of our times together. As always, if you have questions or comments, please feel free to call the number at the bottom of your screen or contact us at parrishcofc.com. And there'll be a link to an email address where you can contact me personally there. We have been, for the last few weeks, going through the entire Bible as we search the Scriptures. We started in Genesis and yesterday began the book of Ruth. 4 chapters, but a lot of information in Ruth. I wish that I had time just to sit down and for us to read that book together, because there's so much that we just cannot get to in the overviews that we're doing in a matter of a day or so. But here are some of the things that we saw yesterday. We saw that the story of Ruth is just a beautiful account of loyalty and love. We contrasted Ruth's life with the life of the common person of Israel in that day. How Israel was rebelling, but Ruth was righteous. How Israel was immoral, but Ruth kept her integrity. How Israel were chosen by God, but they disappointed God. Ruth is a Gentile, a Moabitess, but she chooses God. We saw how Israel faced battlefields and she faced harvest fields. We saw how Israel received confusion and distress and she received peace and rest, because she is faithful, because she is good, because she is loving. We overviewed the book, we looked at some outlines, and we saw how the story results in Naomi's blessing the birth of Obed, who becomes the grandfather of David, who is an ancestor of Christ. We mentioned that there are some lessons we're going to look at today. And we're going to take some time to go not only to the book of Ruth, but to the New Testament to make these lessons applicable for us in the 21st century. You see, Ruth finds rest in the house of Boaz. Rest is the first thought I want us to look at, because rest is something that God promises. Jesus says in Matthew 11, verse 28, "Come, take my yoke upon you and learn of me, and you will find rest to your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Rest. Ruth had labored hard to keep her and to keep Naomi alive. And now she is rewarded with rest in the home of her husband. In Ephesians chapter 5, when Paul begins talking about verse 21 about the husband and wife relationship, he says somewhere down there around verse 30, 31, that this is a mystery, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. We are the bride of Christ, the bride that's adorned for her husband, that will be reunited with him as heaven when we enter that rest. We labor here. The rest is to come. Revelation 14, verse 13. "Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, indeed, blessed, says the Spirit, for they will rest from their labors, and their deeds shall follow them." There is a rest that remains, a reward that remains for those who are faithful to God. The story of Ruth, an Old Testament story, is a picture, if you will, of that rest that awaits the bride of Christ. Boaz, in many ways, becomes a type, a foreshadow of Christ. It's Boaz that redeems Ruth and Naomi and provides for their rest and provides for their blessing. Look at Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 11, "And of Christ, therefore remember that at one time you were Gentiles in the flesh." Ruth was a Gentile. called uncircumcision by what is called circumcision, which is made in the flesh by hands. Remember that you were at that time separated from Christ, alienated from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in this world. But now, verse 13, in Christ Jesus, you who were once afar off have been brought near by the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one, and has broken down in his flesh this dividing wall of hostility, reconciling us to God in one body through the cross. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 11 through about verse 16. He is our Redeemer. He has bought us and brought us from outside of God into God through himself. Boaz is a type of Christ. Turn to the book of 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, and we see another way in which Boaz foreshadows the idea of what Christ would be. Because Boaz becomes the husband of Ruth. Christ becomes the husband, the groom of the church. Look at chapter 11, 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 2. Paul says, I feel a divine jealousy for you, for I betrothed you to one husband, to present you as a pure virgin to Christ. Again, there's that picture of us being the bride of Christ that will find that rest because of the work that we have done. And again, he is that provider of rest. Matthew 11, verse 28. Boaz provided rest for Ruth. Christ provides rest for those who are his. Matthew 11, verse 28 through 30. Come unto me, all you who are labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Come, take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. We find that rest. We find Boaz being a picture, if you will, of Christ. We also find lessons about the fact that circumstances do not make or destroy believers. I hear people all the time, and I talk to people all the time, say, I could serve God only if my life were better. Once I get these things in my life taken care of, then I can come back to God. Or I've heard people who were Christians say, well, I was serving God faithfully until this happened, and it just made me turn on God. No, well, circumstances should not make or break the believer. It was circumstances that may have led Elimelech and Naomi to Moab, and it may have been circumstances that brought them back to Bethlehem. But you'll notice that Naomi and Ruth were faithful to God no matter the circumstances. Ruth was faithful to Naomi no matter the circumstances. When her husband died, she didn't leave, she stayed with Naomi no matter the circumstances. Look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and let's begin at verse 16. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, beginning at 16. So we do not lose heart. Though our outer nature is wasting away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For this slight, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are temporary or transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. Paul says, don't focus on what's here and now. Focus on what's there. Don't let the circumstances destroy you. Learn, no matter what situation you are in, to trust and to be content in God. Romans chapter 8 and verse 28. For we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and those who are called according to his purpose. It doesn't mean that everything is good. It doesn't mean that God makes everything happen and it's good whether we know it or not. It just means that whatever happens in our life can be for our good if we will love and if we will trust and if we will follow God. Paul says it this way in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 11, not that I speak Not that I speak in regard to want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. Then he concludes in verse 13 with, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Don't let circumstances of life change you. Be faithful to God no matter what. Tough times come, we'll face them. But stay with God. It doesn't mean God has deserted you. He may be there waiting for you to reach up so he can hold your hand and carry you through. Don't let circumstances destroy your faith. Let them strengthen your faith. Faith, ultimately, becomes the test of whether or not I am truly a disciple of God. Ruth remained faithful. Naomi remained faithful. 1 John chapter 5 and verse 4. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Well, we sing a song. Encamped along the hills of light, you Christian soldiers rise, and press the battle ere the night shall veil the glowing skies. Against the foe and veils below, let all our strength be hurled. Faith is the victory we know that overcomes the world. Faith is the victory. Faith is the victory. Oh, glorious victory that overcomes the world. We can face the situations of life because of our faith in God. When we trust God, we are rewarded. Ruth put her trust in Naomi and her trust in God, and she was rewarded. Boaz put his faith in God, and he was rewarded. 2 John verse 8 says, look to yourselves, that you do not lose the things we worked for, that we may receive a full reward. John records in Revelation 2 and verse 10, to overcome, to be faithful, even when faced with certain death. Be faithful to the point of death, and you will receive the crown of life. Paul says it this way, I fought the good fight. I've kept the faith. I've finished the course. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me in that day, but not to me only, but to all those who love his appearing. Ruth. The story of Ruth becomes the story of every man. We're away from God, but God has provided a Redeemer. And if we come to him by faith, we can be God's people. We can be God's child. Thank you for joining us today as we have searched the Scriptures. We have now together studied from Genesis all the way to the book of Ruth. Tomorrow we will attempt to go through 1 and 2 Samuel together. Until then, may God continue to bless your day. Yes, sir. Okay.
I got there too late for forever.